Hello my dears, and welcome back to my corner of the internet. I'm Shannon, and today I've got a special book talk video to share with you guys. Today, actually about an hour ago, I finished reading a Christopher Pike book. And back when I was a kid, probably from when I was 10 to 12, maybe to 13, I loved Christopher Pike. And this story will probably be a familiar one to a lot of you, especially if you're like me and you grew up loving horror. When I was a kid, I lived in rural Newfoundland, which is an island on the east coast of Canada. And starting probably around grade 5, almost every day after school, I would go to the town's library. I loved it there. When I tell you I loved it there, I mean capital L loved it there. The librarian was a woman named Diane, and I loved her. She's what started my still standing love of all librarians everywhere. And I got to know her pretty well, you know, as well as a child can know an adult librarian because they see her every day. And she'd take pleasure in helping me try to find books that she thought I would like. And then the more I would go, the more she got to know my taste. She'd put books aside for me, things she thought I'd like. Anyway, it was, I guess, around grade 5. First, I found R.L. Stine, of course. And then as I got a little older and I moved into like his Fear Street books, which are for kind of more for teenagers, I also got introduced to Christopher Pike. And he was the one that really got me good. He would scare me so bad. I'd be laying in bed reading my little Christopher Pike books, and I'd get to scary parts and I'd take the book and I'd reach down and I'd throw it under my bed. So far that the next day I'd have to like get under and try to like scooch under the bed to be able to reach it. And I loved it. It's where my love of horror blossomed from. And I think of Christopher Pike fondly every so often, and then I'll go on Amazon and try to find a couple of his books to order. And they're so hard to find. Every time I go on there, I can't find any. Now, if I had ever been thinking whenever I was in the city, probably if I had went to like a Chapters Indigo or like one of the big, you know, well, that is the only big bookstore chain in Canada, I probably would have found one, but I never thought of it when I was in the bookstore. And the city's like 2 hours away. So anyway, I'd keep going on Amazon trying to find them. Go on the Chapters Indigo website, try to find them, nothing. The other day, probably about a week ago, I went on and this was here. It's called See You Later. It was published in 1990. And if I had to guess, I would guess that I've probably had already read it back in the day, but of course I didn't remember. It was over 30 years ago at this point. But I was so excited when it got here. I had been hoping, I had my fingers really crossed that this was going to be like a more paranormal type of story, but more of a ghost story. It's not. It's a science fiction time travel story, but I still had a lot of fun reading it. And the thing that really surprised me about this, because I would say the last time I read a Christopher Pike book was probably in 95 or 96, maybe even earlier than that. No, probably 96. Was how well it kind of stands up, like the writing, like they're kids' books, or at least for teenagers. And I found that the writing, while it's still very much a story appropriate for, you know, young teenagers, 10, 11, 12, it's not written. Now, to be fair, I don't read a lot of like middle grade or YA now, so I can't compare how it's written, but it's not really written down. Like there's no talking down, like it's well written. And I was surprised by that. Perhaps surprised isn't the right word. I hadn't realized. Like, to give you an example, here's how the book begins. It began with a smile, or at least that's what I thought. But then I didn't think much when I was 18. I just longed for things I didn't have and reacted when they came to me and I no longer wanted them. Like, that's pretty profound for a, you know, a kid's time travel sci-fi book. I don't know. Anyway, when I read that, I was like, okay, Christopher Pike, I see you. Let's see how this goes. So I'm going to tell you a bit about it. It's crazy. It goes off the rails in 25 different directions, but it was still a lot of fun to read. And obviously there's going to be spoilers here. It's a, you know, it's a 34-year-old book. 34? 90? 2000? Yeah. There's still something when I hear the 90s. That sounds like it was 10 years ago. But yeah, 34 years. It's a 34-year-old book. So yeah, but there's gonna be spoilers. So anyway, this book is about a boy named Mark, and like we just learned, he's 18 years old. When we meet him, he is walking into a record store, and when he walks in, there's a beautiful young girl who he finds out's name is Becky, and they get to talking, and in time he asks her if the store has a video game department, and she's like, we sure do, right back there. And he's like, cool, I designed and wrote one of those video games. And she's like, no way, you're too young. And he's like, no, I'm serious. So he takes her back there and shows her the one that he made, and she's like, that's so cool, it's a whole thing. They kind of become friends. And he has a bit of a crush on her, but he soon finds out that she has a boyfriend, a boy named Ray, who works at the local bookstore in the mall. Anyway, so he starts visiting her a few times a week, and they're getting closer, and he's really enjoying her company. Anyway, one of these times he goes in to see her, and there's a man in there, and there's something about this man that's vaguely familiar to him. He feels like, I know this guy from somewhere. And then he finds out that the man was in there asking after him. And he's like, okay, yeah, it's me. And he's like, hey, I'm Vincent, and I make video games. And I'm here looking for you because I hear that you also make video games, and I've made one, and I feel like it needs some work. Could you maybe come and help me? And Mark's like, you want me to come and help you with your video game? And Vincent's like, I do. And Mark's like, you know what? Fine. Do you want to go right now? And Vincent's like, let's do it. So Mark follows him into his house, and like Vincent has a very fancy car, like a black Ferrari. And they go to this house that's a big fancy house. But once they go inside, like it's sparsely furnished. And Mark's kind of like, that's a little weird. And Vincent's like, yeah, well, I just moved here. Like, I don't have much stuff. So Vincent shows him the game, and it's like this really well-developed or visually very appealing game, and it's about nuclear war and America and China and this whole thing. And so Mark starts kind of giving him his input and telling him ways he could improve it, and Vincent's, you know, kind of ignoring his suggestions, but Mark's kind of just happy to be there because the more time he spends with Vincent, the more he really likes the guy. And then soon he meets Vincent's girlfriend, Kara. And this, again, when he meets Kara, he's like, I know her from somewhere, but I don't know where. These two are so familiar to me. So it kind of goes on from there. Mark's helping Vincent with the game. Mark's spending time with Becky. Kara is now trying to encourage Mark to continue pursuing Becky even though she has a boyfriend. She's like, who cares that she has a boyfriend? You're better than this guy. And she sets up this whole thing where she goes to like where Ray works. That's the boyfriend. He's flirting with her. She eventually gets him to ask her out for dinner. She goes. Then the next day, because when they're on the date, she sees a picture of Becky in Ray's wallet. And he's like, oh, that's my cousin. And Kara, of course, knows that's not his cousin, that's his girlfriend. So the next day she goes to the record store where Becky is. And like, oh, you're Ray's cousin. I went on a date with him last night, which of course ends up in a big fight between Becky and Ray, and they end up breaking up. Mark now has his shot. He takes it, and she accepts his date invitation. Now, on the one hand, Mark's really confused why Kara's so invested in his love life, but he's like, you know what? Whatever. And anyway, so Becky and Mark spend a great night together. They just have the best time. And then the next morning, Mark goes to give her a call because Kara's like, listen, me and Vincent, we're going to be leaving. And Mark's like, what do you mean? She's like, don't worry about it. We're just going to be leaving. You're never going to see us again. We come from very far away and we won't be returning. So I just want to make sure everything's good with you and Becky before me and Vincent get the hell out of here. He's like, okay. So he calls Becky. Becky hangs up. Kara's like, that's not supposed to happen. Mark's like, what? So anyway, they go to the record store where Becky works. She's furious. She's found out about what Kara did on behalf of Mark to get Ray and Becky to break up. You following this? And Kara's like, how in God's name did she find out? How? There's no way she found out. So we find out that there's a third mysterious person. So if Kara and Vincent are the two mysterious persons, there's a third, and his name is Frederick. And he's gone and told Ray. Kara's like, what in God's name is he doing here? And so things start to pick up. We find out that Frederick is Kara's husband. And then, of course, we know Vincent is Kara's boyfriend. So we're like, what's going on here? And as confused as we are, Mark is also that confused. So there's this whole thing where Kara starts telling him the story of who they are and what they are and where they're from and where they're going and where they've come from and what they're doing and why. So the reason why Vincent and Kara seem so familiar to Mark is because Vincent and Kara are Mark and Becky from the future. And they've come back in time because in the future, Frederick is Ray. And so in their timeline, Becky and Ray stayed together, got married, and Ray became the president. Ray became the president of the United States and started World War III. So now Kara and Vincent have come back to try to break up Becky and Ray so that Becky can go and be with Mark so that that doesn't happen. And then Kara's like, I have to kill young Ray. And Mark is like, girl, you can't do that. You can't do that. Because at this point, Frederick has kidnapped Vincent and has killed him right across. So now Kara's like, I'm gonna run Ray over. But then, so Becky still doesn't, like Becky and Ray, they're still in the dark, of course, because what are you gonna tell them? So Kara's ready to run Ray over with her car. And she's waiting for him outside. And then Ray's coming out to his car and Kara's getting ready to run him over. Becky comes out and so Mark has convinced Becky to trust him. He's like, I know you're not talking to me, but I need you to trust me and I need your help. I need your help. And she helps him, like leads him to where Ray and Kara are. Because Mark's like, if you were going to kill Ray, where and when would you do it? So Mark's about to get hit. Becky can see it's about to happen. She runs out. She runs. And Kara hits her instead. And then Becky ends up dying in the hospital after much sadness. And so before Becky dies in the hospital, sorry, getting ahead of myself, Becky's been hit. She's on the ground bleeding. Ray has a gun. Shoots Kara. So now Becky's laying bleeding. Kara's laying bleeding. Because Ray's like, who the hell are you? Because of course he recognizes her as being the girl he took out on a date. But the reason they don't recognize her as Becky is because Kara's wearing a wig, she's got contacts, she's got a Scottish accent. So like, even though sure, Kara and Becky might look a little similar, your brain doesn't go there because it's impossible, right? So your brain's like, not like, oh, this is Kara or this is Becky from the future. Because you just wouldn't think that. That wouldn't make any sense. So Becky gets taken to the hospital. Ray goes with her. Mark takes Kara to this cave. That's a part of the story. And he takes her in there and he's like, okay, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. if Becky dies, then you can just keep living here. And Kara, of course, is like, that's not how that works, my dude. And he's like, what if it is? And she's like, but it isn't. And he's like, but what if it is? And she's like, but it isn't. So anyway, Becky dies. And then now they're kind of pinning their hope on the fact that because Ray lost the, you know, this young girl he loved as a young boy, that he's going to grow up into a different man that maybe doesn't become the president and start World War III. You know, one can hope. And because in the timeline where he does become the president and start World War III, like, he's in an unhappy marriage, he's a terrible man. So they're hoping that this loss at such a tender age will form him into a different person. So we can all hope, right? So then Kara evaporates into the moon. Not into the moon, but there was a line where she's like, if you're gonna miss me, you don't have to, I'm right here, I'm the moon. And there's a whole thing about aliens and angels that would take too long to talk about, so we're not gonna do it. But there you go. So then we get an epilogue that tells us about the rest of Mark's life. He lives until he's 29, which was foretold by Kara. She already knew that that was when he died, but she had hoped, of course, if they could have worked it all out and changed all the things, that perhaps he would have lived longer, because the angels said something to her when they were on the spaceship about how, like, he'll be fine if he finds love and happiness, but then he doesn't, and so he still dies at 29, but he's pretty content when he dies. And then he goes off into the ether to be with Vincent and Kara, and ta-da! Let's see how it ends here. Yeah, here's how it ends. I feel Vincent near me. I sense Kara. They come to me from another time and place where there is only happiness. I feel as if two angels stand behind me, touch my head. It may be only my imagination, but I do not think so. They're real, like my story. Although these two do not whisper to me, they stand silent. They've already told me all there is to tell. I know I'll see a light when the dawn finally comes, the cool white light of the moon, shining forever in a starry universe that goes on forever, or the warm light of the sun burning brilliantly in a sky all its own, a sky that lasts only a day. I know I will either live or die. I wish I could say which it'll be. So there you go. See you later. See you later, Christopher Pike. I had fun. It was nice to revisit such a beloved author that I had so much fun with as a kid, you know? And I hope that his books become easier to find, because I would love to read more. I would love to read some of the real spooky ones that used to get me when I was a kid. I'm just reading like the list of some of the books he's got. And yeah, it says here, no one does it better than Christopher Pike. And I agree. Like, for me when I was a kid, nobody did it better. And I just loved it. So let me know in the comments down below. Did you also love Christopher Pike when you were a kid? And if so, what was your favorite book? I'm going to add that to a list that every few months I will go on the internet and search for. And maybe one day it will show up and I will read it, and we'll do a part 2 to this revisiting Christopher Pike series. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a great day, and I will see you again real soon. Bye.